Go ahead and get started. My name is Feliz Baca, and I'm the program coordinator for the Francis McClelland Institute. Dr. Barnett, our interim director, could not be here today to give the intro, so I'm doing that today. We're really excited to have Dr. Neil Websdale here with us from the NAU Family Violence Institute, and he will be presenting his presentation on multidisciplinary and interdisciplinary approaches to family violence. At the Francis McClelland Institute, we are honored to have Francis McClelland as our namesake. Francis McClelland was a business leader and a philanthropist here in Tucson and the Arizona community. She understood the resilience in children, youth, and families, and she was a huge advocate for research on children, youth, and families. And a lot of her legacy was really contributing to a variety of organizations that go towards this very mission. We're also happy that Pamela Turbeville, one of our alums, funds this speaker series. So Pamela was actually an alum of the Norton Family School of Consumer Sciences in 1972, and she was the recipient of the CALS Alumni Achievement Award in 2000. So we're really grateful to both Pamela and Francis McClelland for allowing us to do these series with you all.
Thank you, Felice. Thank you so much. So I'm Dan McDonald, and I'm the interim director of the Norton School. Thank you all for coming. Welcome to our guests, our visitors here today. I met Neil, I don't know, a month or two ago, something like that, and we were talking about the Family Violence Institute and the work that he and his team, pretty extensive team, does. And I said, gosh, this would be really good for our speaker series, the Tuberville speaker series. Of course, the dates had already been set for like most of them, but I got in touch with Felice and with Melissa Barnett and said, can we squeeze somebody else in? Or can we do that? And Neil was available in between, flights all around the globe and all that kind of stuff. And, so I'm really pleased that he was able to make it. And thank you all for fitting into your schedules, because I know that this was an addition not too long ago. So without any further ado, let me introduce Dr. Neil Websdale. Thanks.
Thank you very much for inviting us, our whole group, not just myself. And I'm going to chat about our work, our grant portfolios, and the work that we do in the field. Our work is applied, but I'm a sociologist. My background is sociology and philosophy and history and human rights at the University of London in England. So I've been at NAU for basically 25 years, and we are just exploring other options, to be candid with you, in terms of the future of our work. So Dan and I have talked about some of those things as well. So I just want to put that out on the table. But Ray is going to kick off with just a quick video that he made about the work that we do, which lasts about 90 seconds, and then I'll segue into my little conversation.
The Family Violence Institute, FBI, at Northern Arizona University is the first of its kind in Arizona. The Arizona Child and Adolescent Survivor Initiative, or ACASI, provides specialized trauma-informed wraparound services to families and children who have lost a parent to intimate partner homicide. Arizona Intimate Partner Risk Assessment Instrument System, or APPRAISE, is a risk assessment tool used to assess the potential risk of severe reassault, as well as lethal or near-lethal intimate partner violence. The National Domestic Violence Fatality Review Initiative, or NDVFRI, provides technical assistance to teams engaged in the process of reviewing domestic violence-related deaths. Sustainable Technology Resources and Interventions for Victim Empowerment, or STRIVE, the project provides computer-based resources and mobile phone apps to assist victims in obtaining temporary orders of protection and injunctions against harassment, as well as free legal support. The FBI takes pride in a multidisciplinary and interdisciplinary approach to family violence. The FBI is nonpartisan and evidence-based, operating to uphold rule of law and due process while preserving human rights.
So that language is more than just sort of loose verbiage. It's written into the contracts that we have with the federal government, with our funders, so we are seriously evidence-based, and we're very cautious about being non-partisan. Doesn't mean to say we don't have political perspectives. What it means is that we have to navigate the political terrain to do our work, which I know you're all familiar with, who understand those issues as students here in the Norton School. So I'm going to talk about, just give you an outline of what I'm going to do. I'm going to talk about some of the themes and concepts embedded in studying family violence and the problematic nature of that language. I'm going to talk about our sort of founding initiative, which was our National Domestic Violence Fatality Review Initiative, which I've been working on personally since the mid-1990s. And then I'm going to talk about all the other things that really flow from that initiative. Our community risk, our child survivor initiative, and some of our other initiatives as I go through. And please feel free to stop me, ask questions as I go along, but I'm going to try and finish here by, I think, 2:15, so that we have 15 minutes for questions at the end. So I want to say a few words about our philosophical underpinnings. I mean, we are conciliatory in nature. We work with lots of different community partners. The work that we do, I mean, my Ph.D. is in sociology, but you know, the work we do is applied work. So we work with lots of different entities across political spectra and across institutional types. So we work with, for example, courts. We work with prosecutors, defense attorneys, police, victim advocates, a whole range of folks who deal with these thorny issues connected with family violence. So we recognize, as all good sociologists and political scientists do, that truths are contingent, they're contested, so hence we use evidence. We believe in mixed methods, we believe in using qualitative and quantitative methods. Epistemologically, in terms of ways of knowing, we recognize the complexity of the social world and the nuances that go with making sense of that and how difficult that is. So we recognize that people's realities are socially situated and that they have an understanding based on who they are, their experience, and where they're situated. So, you know, we have that understanding, but we are basically applied in our focus. Now, why did we choose family violence as a topic? It's because we wanted to look at that constellation of abuses that occur within family and kinship systems. So we're well aware of the gendered flavor of the serious abuse, and we get that. We understand, for example, with intimate partner homicides that we're dealing mostly with men who, for example, kill women. We are dealing at the severe end of the violence with male violence. We know this. But we also know from our experience that we're dealing with sometimes female sociopaths, sometimes females who abuse their family members and their children. The reasons for that are complicated. So we wanted to catch all of those different types, and the language of family violence is conservative, but it's a convenient umbrella for us trying to make sense of the world and the grants that we work with. We're always in favor of doing what C. Wright Mills, the famous sociologist, said. You know, we apply the sociological imagination in the sense that we take this lens, this interpretive lens that we have, that we apply to our work, and we tilt it in different directions so that the light comes in at different angles. And we playfully do that with our work so that we develop different sets of understandings. And we challenge each other to do that. We have a range of perspectives within the work that we do at the Institute. We have to. So we have a lot of fun with that, and sometimes some disagreements, which are very cool. We do it respectfully, but we like that. It's part of university life. So let me start by saying a few words about the Fatality Review work that we do nationally. And I don't know, how many of you are familiar with what Domestic Violence Fatality Review is? Are there any of you here that are familiar with that work? So basically what it involves is identifying homicides, suicides, other forms of death that are caused by, related to, or somehow traceable to domestic violence. And this covers a broad range of deaths. Mostly we're talking about the deaths of women who were abused prior to being killed by their partners. their spouses, their former partners, their current partners. It may involve sexual competitor killings. A couple of men who tee off against each other to kill over a woman who's departing one relationship for another. We don't see many women killing women over men. Is there a reason for that? You can be politically incorrect, it's fine. I often get audiences who will courageously say to me, well, guys aren't worth it. They can't say that in this environment. So, we look at what we call sexual competitor killings. We look at family killings. We look at children who kill their parents, for example. Fortunately, this doesn't happen too often, but we do. So we take all these deaths and we review them. We also look at suicides. We reckon there are more suicidal deaths of, say, victims of violence than there are homicidal deaths, particularly battered women who exit violent relationships through suicide rather than through homicide. So we look at all these case types, we map them in communities across this country, and there are 46 states now doing domestic violence fatality review. And as a national technical assistance provider, we have relationships with all those states, and we are charged by the federal government, the US Department of Justice, with providing technical assistance to those teams. So one of our major grants does that. So we have a lot of connections out there, a lot of community building work that we do. So for example, recently we've launched teams in Detroit, St. Louis, Flint, Michigan, Nashville, cities with high homicide rates, cities with a lot of social problems, as well as doing it in other far nicer places. I'm off to Hawaii next month. So we get to go around and pick on. Some of our staff will only go to Hawaii, they won't go to Detroit. That's the way it is, you work with prima donnas, it's the way it is. Reviews can be formal, they can be informal. We can have them prescribed through statute, or we can have them be much more informal in nature. And it just depends on where you are. The US is beautiful like that. There's a lot of difference by state, a lot of difference by statute, protocol, etc. A review of a case could take 2 days. Some teams will review a case or a life in 2 hours. It just depends. Our recommendation as national technical assistance providers is that people take a day or two to review a life. So to give you an example of the most extreme kind of review I've done, in Montana we had a case review which I do national webinars on, where we spent 2 full days reviewing the case, and we did 35 community interviews, 9 of which were with surviving family members. And we pieced the case together. That's an in-depth review. The documentary material in there was about 6,000 pages long. So it's a lot of work, a lot of preparatory stuff, and the team is sequestered away for 2 days to do that work. That's the high end. Then we have, the lower end where teams don't have the resources to do full-blooded reviews like that. They do more cursory reviews. So the idea is that these teams, excuse me, I'm just getting over a cold, they work through the case and they try to develop preventive interventions. And you may say, well, what's the purpose of doing this versus just getting a group of people together around the table and to talk about, how they work with each other? The reality is that people don't talk around the table much when they come from different agencies about how they work together, just in general. But secondly, when you put, if you choose to do this, the homicide photographs on the table, and when you bring in a mother who's lost their daughter, you create an emotionally charged environment that really catalyzes or stimulates conversation and really gets you to focus very sharply on each piece in that chain, and we look very closely at the way cases flow through systems. So the review teams, when we first started, we started in the state of Florida, and then the feds asked me to set this up nationally in 1997. So that was the state of affairs in 1995 in terms of review coverage, the purple area. That's the state of affairs today, and the increase has been substantial. It's not because what we've done, it's an idea whose time has come. People do this themselves, so we just, you know, we promote it, we help, but folks have taken this on as an idea. Now, I digress for a moment to make a couple of philosophical points. This is a radioactive wolf from Chernobyl. You remember Chernobyl, right? Dreadful situation. I used to fly back to England in 1986 and 7 and see my mother. In fact, I'm flying back on Saturday to see my mother for somebody else. But she'd always say to me, now Neil, don't be drinking the wine from Eastern Europe that came out of Chernobyl. That radioactive shower came all the way across Eastern Europe and beyond, up into Scandinavia. Don't be drinking that wine. I said, yes, Mother. 1,000-mile exclusion zone around Chernobyl. No one lives there today. Can't even go there without a hazmat suit on. The Soviets knew there were problems with their nuclear industry for 20 years at least. They'd had accidents, but they hadn't discussed them openly. They'd had tragic outcomes, but small scale. Chernobyl obviously blew all that out of the water. We used Chernobyl and nuclear accidents like Fukushima as examples of what you get if you don't review tragic outcomes properly and transparently. Here's another example. Medical error deaths. How many people die in the United States each year from preventable medical error deaths, do you reckon, roughly? Any thoughts? Don't all speak at once.
1% of all deaths. 1%.
Give me a number. How many? 1,000 a year?
10,000.
A little more? 10,000? 250,000 a year.
Whoa.
Now, they don't mention this when you go in for your colonoscopy, right? They don't mention this. They'll tell you you've got a 0.001% chance of something happening when you go in for your little procedure, whatever it is. If they were to tell you 250,000 people die a year from preventable medical errors in the United States, you may think twice. It might affect business. Medical error deaths, again, suffer from the same problem. They're very concerned about liability, and they should be. They're concerned about their insurance, and they don't review in a way that they could. And you ask docs this, they'll tell you, we don't review. But the other piece of this is that the doc gets to go home at night after they've, you know, how can I put it, done a subpar surgery. So the cadaver goes out on the little gurney. The surgeon goes home for a G&T. So contrast that with this. This was Sullenberger's plane that landed on the Hudson in 2009. Remember, he flew that plane into a flock of geese. I'm sure he didn't mean to. But the plane's going down. He had a minute, if that, to marshal the whole cockpit crew and land it on the Hudson River in New York. But he did. After he did it, people said to him, oh my goodness, what incredible heroism and cool that you could do that in that short space of time and save all those lives. What he said? He said, the hell with heroism. This wasn't heroism. This is 40 years of good reviewing. We knew exactly what to do and how to work together to do that. This wasn't heroism, this wasn't smarts, this was preparation. This was thorough reviewing. The National Transportation Safety Board is an incredible global exemplar of how to review commercial aviation accidents. And if you look at deaths per mile flown, they've steadily gone down. We use NTSB as our philosophical guide with our fatality review work. So our philosophy is important. We don't want to blame and shame people. We want to bring large numbers of people to the table to help us review these tragic outcomes. So the kinds of cases we reviewed, I've already talked about, I won't belabor it. Team membership. This is a stolen Lowry print from, used to paint scenes from the Industrial Revolution in England. But this is a motley assortment of people. When we do fatality review in communities, we want to open it up to the lifeblood of the community. We want all the different agencies and stakeholders that are involved in handling these cases, or who could be, at the table, to talk about this under the shield of a confidentiality statute, to talk about what we could have done differently in these cases. So we want diversity. We want creativity in terms of the building of teams. It's essential, and we want to tap the talents of everyone at the table. And that's hard, because if you've got a judge at the table, the judge is sort of austere and puffed up and has much greater status than someone else at the table. That stuff needs to go out the window, and we need to tap the talents. So facilitating these groups is not always easy. This is just another example from an article we just published in one of the medical journals. The membership of teams. You get a sense there. I don't know if you can read that, but it's diverse. How do we review cases? We construct a timeline. And the big thing with domestic violence cases, intimate partner violence cases, as you probably know, is that they are crimes of accumulation, especially the dangerous ones. It's not like getting stuck up at an ATM or something, or having your house robbed, burglarized, whatever. That's a one-off event. These offenses occur over the long period of time. They often involve lots of systems that don't talk to each other. So we create the timeline to get sort of a 30,000-foot perspective on the unfolding of the case, with a view to trying to understand it better and develop various interventions. We look at red flags or risk markers in cases, knowing that we can't predict rare events. We try to look at the agencies, the stakeholders, the community members involved, and we ask a critical question. What was their level of communication, collaboration, and coordination before the killing? So we try and do that through the lens of the case itself. And then we come up with recommendations. This is, Lenin's old question, what is to be done? But basically, what are we going to do about this in our communities? How can we do something differently? Okay. Key issues that we address. Various data sources. How do we gather data? We are not allowed by the federal government to do research. Although we have a lot of researchers who work with us. There's a prohibition on doing research. Many of us write off this stuff, but we do it in our spare time. So, those of you who are faculty in the room know exactly what I'm talking about here. So we spend a lot of time with data gathering. We're also developing at the moment for the feds a clearinghouse where we're going to have the 46 states hopefully begin to dump data into a central data repository that we're setting up at the moment at NAU. And we've got a team of lawyers, team of data people, team communication specialists to work on how we're going to do that. It's a huge reservoir. And one of the reasons we're looking around potentially for another venue for our work is that we feel that, hey, good afternoon, we feel as though we've kind of plateaued in terms of the resource support that we have at NAU. I'm just being really blunt with you. We feel like we could take off in different directions if we were somewhere else. So we're looking at that. The confidentiality issue is always a challenge for us. How do we protect people's confidentiality, even after their deaths? And yet, how do we get at the information that we need in the cases? And how do we make change? Okay. I'm now going to talk about the other projects that flow from our work here. And I'd like to go on and talk a little bit about our community-informed risk. Yes?
Can I just ask how the cases are initially identified to fall under review by that system?
Great question. So how are the cases identified? Teams are permanently embedded in communities. So, for example, you have a fatality review team here in Tucson, Pima County. A bunch of players on that team. And the police officers, for example, on that team will know of the deaths, intimate partner homicide deaths in their communities. They will put names forward. The county attorney's office will know of deaths that are closed, in the sense that the prosecution's closed, there are no pending appellate issues. So they will know, too, that there are no pending civil issues, the civil litigation issues in the case. So once the case is deemed legally appropriate, then the team will choose which out of our 10 cases a year, or 15, or ever how many. And I think last year it was, I think it was 26 in Tucson, in Pima County. You know, which ones we pick. Is that okay?
Yeah, absolutely.
Sorry, so to clarify, there are 26 potential domestic violence fatalities?
Correct.
And then each team reviews only a small subset of those?
Very good. Yes, exactly right. Yeah. So, and again, teams review within their own capabilities. So some teams can review more than others, but the key is for us as national technical assistance providers, we recommend quality review. Because if there's a logjam or a gap in the system, you can often identify that gap by reviewing one case in depth just as easily as you can by reviewing 10 cases and seeing the same gap all the time. So this is not research, so we know that we're not producing representative data per se at the level of the review, although the data bank clearly lends itself at some point to that kind of more systematic analysis. Okay, so I'm going to talk now about our community-informed risk assessment initiative. And this is something that we're working with throughout the state of Arizona, and we're working with law enforcement, the courts, victim advocate services. And this is a nationally prominent initiative that is unique, really, to the state of Arizona. You may not know this, but the state of Arizona passed an amendment to one of its statutes recently that requires judges at the initial appearance of the accused to consider the results of a risk or lethality assessment when setting bail. And this is an important provision. It's the only state in the union that has that provision. So the risk assessment that the police officer administers at the scene that may connect with that victim with victim advocacy services in communities, in other words, give them more of an opportunity to receive resources, that risk screen that we've developed, which we've called the Appraise, the Arizona Intimate Partner Risk Assessment Instrument System, that system is designed to collect fast, usable case data at scene and pass it on up through the food chain if the victim or alleged victim so chooses. We notify victims at scene. It's our policy to notify victims at scene that the information that they share, which is above and beyond the criminal investigation now, this is a risk screen in addition to the criminal investigation, we notify them that that is potentially discoverable at some point further on by their abuser's counsel. So we mention that point at scene. We feel that's important to be respectful to victims at scenes. So what we're trying to get at here is something we learned in Fatality Review. About half of the intimate partner homicides every year in this country, women die, mostly women, sometimes men, women die in isolation. They've not sought services. They've not seen other people. Their family members may have known, but they've not gone to a shelter. They've not called the police. They've not talked to the clergy member or their faith community member, etc., etc. That raises a question for us. Why is that, first of all? And then in the other cases, when we do the reviews, we find that often there are many, many agency hits. We've had cases in Arizona where there have been 30 different agencies involved in cases where people aren't talking with each other. So the idea of the community-informed risk assessment tool, which we spent 4 or 5 years developing statewide, the idea of it is to create a shared language of risk between different people so they can begin to talk with each other around that shared language to get at that 50% of cases where there's substantial involvement of systems. Okay, so as sociologists, as social scientists, political scientists, we always frame this in terms of the language of risk and the growth of risk societies. So there's a whole sociological literature on this, which I won't bore you with, but I'm sure you're aware of this. You know, this idea of risk didn't just arise in a vacuum. And it emerged as part of the development of broad cultures of control in postmodern America, Western Europe. So we frame those developments sociologically in that context. And we ask critical questions about that too. But you know, when I go and see my doctor, which I do occasionally, I'm afraid of him, but I go and see him, you know, he'll tell me what my cholesterol is. Yeah, Neil, your cholesterol, I don't know what it is, 200 and something or other, right? And he'll say to me, you know, have you stopped eating that bacon? You know, you're clogging your arteries, you're likely to keel over. And I tell him, I had bacon for breakfast this morning. But, you know, he'll say to me, well, your risk of a heart attack compared to your Adonis law enforcement guy who's in perfect health, right? They'll say your risk of having a heart attack is 10 times greater than Greg's. And I'll say to my doc, well, that's the relative risk. I want to know the absolute risk. I want to know what my risk is compared with the total population, because I want to keep gobbling down the bacon. He'll say, well, that's a different question. I say, well, what is it? And he'll say, well, you got a 5% chance in the next 10 years. I said, I'll take the bacon. Way to go, indeed. Way to go. Way to go. I agree. No, joking aside, I'm trying to make a point here. This is a really important point. We can't predict negative outcomes in domestic violence cases very easily. We really can't. The outcome measure that we use in our appraised risk assessment is severe reassault, the likelihood of severe reassault within the ensuing 7 months of the initial or presenting offense, right? So we can tell a victim like me that you have a 10.5-fold greater chance if you've answered 4 or more of these questions yes than someone who answers 0 or 1 yes. We can tell them their relative risk. But their absolute risk is only about 15% of actually experiencing that outcome. And that has serious civil liberties implications. Because if you're a prosecutor, you may want to focus on the relative risk. Oh my goodness, this poor woman's off the scale. Look what this guy's done to her, or alleged to have done to her. Therefore, we should set bail high, don't release the guy. However, if you're a defense attorney, you might want to focus on the fact that, hey, only 15% of these work this way. Therefore, my client's one of the 85%, cut him loose. So we deal with these issues, pragmatic issues, all the time around the sort of the rudimentary statistical stuff that we do. So what we're trying to do with this risk assessment is combine clinical and actuarial data. We want to trust the experience of law enforcement officers. If ever you want to understand family violence, you go to the Tucson PD or other PD detective units in this state and listen to them talk about family violence. Those people have insights that the researchers do not know of. They have different insights. So we value and respect that wisdom. So we build in a police officer override on our risk assessments. So we want their clinical judgment. We want them to override our actuarial judgments if they need to. So we combine the two. This tool was developed in Yavapai County, as with all our work. It's developed in communities. We spent 3 years building the tool. I'll show you the tool. This is it. This is now being administered by about 35 police departments across Arizona. With Greg Gianjobi here is our law enforcement director. He's in charge of this whole initiative, and he's been very successful in launching this across the state. We've got a number of other states interested in this. So this is a concern with due process. It's a concern with the rule of law and how to do risk honestly, transparently, recognizing the limitations. That's tier 1. Officers have to ask that question at scene. Contains all the risk markers for dangerous intimate partner violence and potential homicide. That's tier 2. It's optional. You can see at the bottom, I just made this language, this writing really small to irritate the audience. But you can see the override box at the bottom there. Even if she answers all of them no, or sometimes he answers all of them no, if the officer senses that the victim or alleged victim is answering those questions no before the question has been fully verbalized, the officer is concerned about her body language, her eye contact or lack thereof, perception of fear, the officer checks the box, referral for services. The victim can choose to take the services or not, as the case may be. Okay, I think we've already talked about this. We talk about relative and absolute risk. I've already talked about this, the statutory change in Arizona, very progressive. We spent 2 years getting this risk assessment tool through the Arizona Supreme Court. But the Supreme Court validated it, or recommended it for use by Arizona law enforcement agencies back in 2017, and in 2018 they operationalized it. So they recommended it for use as validated. It's a good example of the science turning into social policy. We're now going to say a few words about our Arizona Adolescent Survivor Initiative. And this came out of 20 years of fatality review work, and of us, and we made many mistakes as we did review work. But one of the mistakes we made was to not pay sufficient attention to the children that remain after these killings. We kept noticing that there were kids left after typically the mother was murdered, and the father was incarcerated, or the father committed suicide. There were kids left. Where'd they go? Who knows? They've experienced great trauma. What happens to them? We didn't know. So we want to do something about it. So we got a couple of $1 million from the Victims of Crime Act folks, and we funded this project. And this is the initial project. So Ray's going to just do a little video intro. Thanks, Ray. So we have a clientele at the moment of about 130 children and surviving family members. This is an Arizona-based program. One of our goals at the moment is to approach the feds to turn this into a national technical assistance initiative. You can see these are wraparound services. This is very, very labor-intensive work. We have a team of 6 or 7 people across the state who do this work. They're a group who travel pretty much all the time within Arizona and who provide some technical assistance to other states, but they don't do that systematically. They'll do it casually at the moment. But this is the kind of stuff they do. I'm not going to belabor this because I'm short of time. You can see some of the work we have here from the kids, the drawings. But you imagine a child who, you know, this happens. You know, kids will not only witness the homicide, they'll clean up the blood. And those kids are deeply traumatized, and they're often told by the state to keep their mouths shut because they're witnesses for the prosecution. So that freezes trauma in place, so it compounds. the complex trauma and deep trauma that's built over time from watching this stuff in their families. So we wanted to intervene in this in a systematic way using skilled clinicians. So we have a team of clinicians, but we obviously still need to go much further. So I'm going to move through here. We have mentoring services. You can see here our system. And my PowerPoint is available for folks to see. So you can look at this a little bit later. But our approach is therapeutic trauma-informed engagement with clients. Intense engagement with clients. We subcontract with a lot of skilled therapists across the state, and our clinical director works cases with therapists who work cases. So it's a sort of subcontracting of skill sets. Victim-driven, child and family-centered. You can see the kinds of services. We offer immigration services, legal services, mentorship, wraparound, basic needs stuff, right the way through to emotional support, through to outdoor stuff. We do telehealth with them. We got a grant from Verizon to provide teletherapy services. So the kids, now this isn't good for me, right? I don't want to emote over the machine. Well, I guess. But the kids, the 14-year-olds, will talk. And they'll do FaceTime in ways that we won't do, or I won't do as an older person. So it's a really interesting kink in the service delivery. And of course it saves us a fortune in terms of transportation costs, outreach, travel for all these folks. So it's revolutionized the work that we've got. So that's one piece of the program that's very exciting. Another piece is we've got some major outward bound support from other corporations to take kids out into the natural world as well, to assist with their healing. And as a runner of 42 years, I especially like this stuff. So anyway, another project that we have is what we call our Fatality Review and Safety Assessment Project. And this merges the death review work that we've been doing for 20 years with another major national technical assistance initiative, which is known as safety assessments or institutional analysis. In other words, analyzing the way in which cases flow through systems. Institutional analysis or institutional ethnography does this by on-the-ground interviewing very detailed, meticulous analysis using basically three principal sources: observation, field observation, direct observation; text analysis, in other words, in our case, analysis of files, whether it be police files, medical files, this, that, analysis of files, court data; or also the third methodology, talking with people. We spend a lot of time interviewing, talking with folks about how cases flow through systems. The institutional analysis does this with live cases. The Fatality Review, as you can imagine, does it with death cases. We work back from the death. So these two meet in the middle, so we merged these two in what we've known as FRASA, Fatality Review and Safety Assessment. So we've launched this nationally. We've done several of these initiatives within the state of Arizona. In fact, Charlene LaPlante is here from the Santa Cruz County Attorney's Office. She's the chief deputy county attorney down there, and she's been working with us over the last few years on one of these projects. Tremendous work they're doing down there in Nogales. So we build this, we operationalize it. Again, it's an example of sort of multidisciplinary, interdisciplinary work on the ground, applied, that results in specific outcomes and recommendations for communities that are evidence-based. It's usually a 3-year project. The first year is a meta-analysis of homicides and reviews to raise a community question they want answered. In Charlene's case, down in Santa Cruz, I can barely remember, but I think it concerned courthouse safety and repeat offenders. Victim safety. In
trying to access services.
Trying to access services within courthouses, yeah. So very interesting work. And I know Greg and others have been involved in this too. So this is one example of that kind of project. And then years 2 and 3, we bring the specialist safety assessment team in, who are basically institutional ethnographers. And they know how to track cases and the way they flow through systems in a way that dovetails with the Fatality Review work that we've done at the front end in the questions. So it's a way of merging these two multi- and interdisciplinary initiatives to look at caseloads. We're not out to blame individuals or shame people. It's the same philosophy as we have in death review. We recognize that these are complex problems, just like aviation crashes. So we don't want to blame individuals or point fingers. That's not productive. We want to look at the way cases flow through systems to get at that. So it's sort of a 30,000 view. Okay, so this was an acronym that I developed a while ago before I wrote the grant. Dr. Ferraro actually wrote the grant. She's our Director of Training and Curriculum. She wrote this brilliant grant, and we didn't expect to get it funded. But we got it funded by accident, I have to say. But we got it. And the design was to provide services for victims in remote locations, again, down in Santa Cruz County. It stands for Sustainable Technology Resources and Interventions for Victim Empowerment. I can never remember the acronym, so I have to be reminded of the acronym all the time. But the idea is to deploy technology to address victim needs in two main areas: access to legal information, safe access and legal procedures, and access to legal immigration assistance. As you can imagine, in Santa Cruz County, both those issues are prominent issues. But if a victim goes to court, for example, it's very easy in a small community for that victim to be intimidated by, for example, the offenders or the accused family. So we want to set the remote sites up so they don't have to deal with the same issues in the same way. There's a dearth of legal services, so we're hoping to promote legal services, basically to give people access to their rights and to resources. And I'm cognizant of the time, so I'm going to... Dan, am I okay for time?
I think you're good. Felice, right? We're good? Yeah.
You have
Please
about
be good.
11 minutes.
Another 11 minutes
And
before
if you
questions?
want, yes.
Okay, good, good. So, we're making services available online. So we want to encourage people to use those services. Remember, the younger generation are more vulnerable to this violence than older folks in general. So we're making those services available. We're establishing remote sites at things like health centers, family advocacy centers. So we're building those bridges in communities so that victims can utilize them. We're building sites for legal immigration services so that we can bring low and pro bono attorneys into those sites to enhance victims' legal rights. We're building a phone app, and Ray's in charge of this. He's taken the lead technologically. Absolute genius with the work he does with our team. Taken us to a new level. I mean, I'm a Neanderthal with this stuff. Ray really is something else. So he's taken us into the 21st century. And we want to increase the awareness of these services as well. That's the purpose of doing this. So we're working with victim advocacy community members. We're working with the county attorney's office. We've got our own specialist victim advocate. Ivor Rody, who's also here today, is working with us, who knows how to do victim advocacy very well. So we've got a whole team of folks working on this. And I want to say a few words about our research to practice public education initiative that we have. Again, this is a federal contract, Department of Health and Human Services, so we work with those national technical assistance providers that have contracts with DHHS. And our task with this initiative, and Dr. Ferraro is in charge of this initiative, is to basically take the work of researchers, prominent researchers in the field, and turn it into common sense. And I don't mean that negatively about researchers, but we're trying to take research findings and render them usable for everyday folks in an applied setting. And that's harder than we may think. It really is. To get, you know what it's like. I mean, how many researchers and academics do we have in the room here? A good few, yeah? So, you know, when we write this stuff, you know, especially earlier on in our careers, we write in this arcane, obscure language, and, you know, we're very happy when we produce, say, I don't know, a referee journal article or something. It's a little, nobody reads it, of course, but a few people read it. But, it goes, sits on some dusty shelf, and then, as our careers progress, we realize that maybe we could write more accessibly, if possible. So this initiative is designed to parlay research into communities so that folks can use it. So we have a national webinar series that we do for an organization that's funded by the US Department of Justice, where we do 6 webinars a year, and we write a research paper that is a research to practice paper. So, this is something that we work in collaboration with our project partners on, but we'll set hour-and-a-half webinars 6 times a year. So one every 2 months. We'll have several hundred, 500 people on the line. We'll take questions, Q&A. We'll put the PowerPoint up. So we reach folks. Let me just focus on this year's question. I forgot to do that. I was moving too fast. The question we were commissioned to address this year was the question, are intimate partner violence risk assessments racially biased? So, in other words, if we ask sensitive questions at crime scenes that involve, for example, prior criminal history, certain forms of violence, even although we don't collect questions about race or ethnicity or social class background in the risk assessment screen, do we nevertheless end up inadvertently reproducing racial disadvantage? In other words, in prior criminal histories or prior acts of violence, is racial affiliation disproportionately baked into the answers that people give? In other words, can we say that we're not reproducing racial disadvantage? It's an interesting question. So we spent several months reviewing the research and presenting the arguments for and against. And that article, and I don't have time to go into it, is up on the Battered Women's Justice website, and we're happy to share it with anyone who's interested. But this is the kind of work that we do. In the preceding year, Dr. Ferrara wrote a brilliant piece on the effectiveness of batterer intervention programs. Do they work or don't they work? And again, we're commissioned. We get asked this all the time by judges, for example. Well, I can refer this person over here, but do they really work? Do they reduce recidivism? So Dr. Ferrara addressed that question as part of our contract so that, we could come up with a definitive answer. And of course, the answer is always sometimes they do and sometimes they don't. Sometimes there's racial disadvantage baked in, sometimes there isn't. This shows this shows that. The usual academic caveats, right? Sort of the academic CYA approach to the world. But anyway, that gives you a little flavor of what that contract's about. So let me try and very briefly summarize before we go into questions. We work in every state of the Union. We also collaborate with other governments. Greg and I were just up in Canada with the folks in the northeastern provinces there. They're looking at setting up an interprovincial fatality review initiative. We work with the British Home Office to set homicide review up. Currently working with some folks in Ireland to do this. Work with the Ministry of Justice in Portugal. We work with the Canadians extensively in other provinces too. So we do a lot of work all over the place. We have a remote style of operating. We obviously have a series of offices at NAU. We have folks in Phoenix at the NAU North Campus on Greenway and 29th. We also have an employee in Yuma. So we have an employee who lives in Peoria. So folks work all over. It's a strange working relationship. We travel a lot. You know, it's sort of like in some ways a 21st century operation, in that if I have 2 days in my office in a week, that's a bad week. It's a bad week because it's an unproductive week. Because I have to be there to do administrivia, which I hate. I just hate. So, you know, and Dan, I know you know this, and others in the room too, so we love it. Yeah, Dan's a runner too. I know he doesn't love it, but anyway. So, we work like this, which you may think is, oh my goodness, these guys do whatever the hell they like. And you'd be totally wrong, because what we have to do with the federal government, I'm sure again you know this from your own work and your own experience, the federal government requires us to list every frickin' outcome that we engage in. If you ever saw the reports that we have to fill on what we do and how they have access to our time, the level of accountability is just staggering and burdensome. So there's an interesting mix here. It looks like we have freedom, right? But on the other hand, there's something else going on over here. I don't know if you're familiar with Leonard Cohen's Closing Time, but you know, it looks like freedom, but it feels like death. It's something in between, I guess. You know, it's an odd juxtaposition. But on that note, I'll leave it because I've used my full hour, and then maybe we can just have a little bit of conversation if you guys have any interest. So thanks for listening. Yes?
Can you clarify how you're working with legal immigration services? So are you sending staff attorneys into detention centers so that they can work with, like, especially women who a lot of times experience domestic violence and have those cases? I know Florence Project has staff attorneys that are doing that work somewhere. Is that in conjunction from Florence Project, or are you doing that?
That's a great question. We have some connection indirectly through the Florence Project, but we are dealing with things further that come before people, for example, are in detention. But we do clearly have a number of cases. Like, for example, some of our CASI clients, our Child Survivor Initiative clients, are involved in the immigration and detention system. We've had some of those. We've had some cartel cases. We've had some very dangerous cases that we've worked. So the short answer is occasionally. But we are exploring the interface. The Strive project is just getting going. We've just got it off the ground. So we suspect that as low and pro bono attorneys become more involved in the project, and this is again through Charlene's expertise in part, that we will begin to go down some of those paths. But great question. Very tricky stuff, of course, the immigration debate at the moment. We have a very complex relationship with Border Patrol. Very complex, because those folks work sometimes and feed some of our fatality review teams. So it's a very complicated relationship. Questions?
So Neil, at the outset, you said that you're restricted from doing research based on, I guess, the grants and contracts that you have. And I'm guessing that you are using a sort of stricter definition of research as in, you know, sort of contributing to the generalizable knowledge of, you know, in this case, the human experience. But I thought I heard a lot of research in there. It's research-based, and then you're also informing the development of your program. So I was wondering if you could sort of, if you could broaden your definition of it, of research, and speak to how research contributes to what you do.
I was hoping that no one would uncover that contradiction.
We live it. We're in
I know, we live it too.
I have all those
we
restrictions.
We live it too. Obviously, the generalizable knowledge stuff, the feds have a sense that highly positivistic research is what constitutes proper research contributing to generalizable knowledge. So we have the potential on a number of our projects to contribute to that. So the golden rule for us is that if we're working on their time, we cannot do research. But 30% of my time, for example, is paid for by the state of Arizona. as indeed a number of other people who work with us. We have research affiliates who work with us, and we're always looking for new affiliates. And they have the capacity to do that. So it's not that our data is not amenable to it, or that we don't do it. We do it, but there's a firewall up administratively. So we're very particular about that firewall. You can imagine a data dump of 200 review teams that have intricate, meticulous detail about homicides. The potential for that is enormous. You know, just in many, many ways, right? So the feds know this, but the office that funds us is also aware of their restrictions under Congress. So they know what we do too, and we probably make them a little nervous too. But yes, we do research. So for example, the books that I've written have been in parallel with the work that we've done, but distinct from. Is that?
I get it. Yeah, I don't know, but yeah, I understand that.
I mean, you probably do the same thing, right?
Well, we have a number of grants through Cooperative Extension that are more outreach programs. So we do collect a lot of information around nutrition, physical activity, and that type of thing. And that cannot be used as research. But in conjunction with that, we can have separate pieces that are used that we can, on our own time, on our own dollar, conduct research that's overlapped with that, but it has to be distinct. And then we always have evaluation, which again is not generalizable, but informs the development of programs. These guys we have evaluation team here that inform the program.
Right, and we love evaluators. I mean, you can see this Taurasi program that we have, as we build this is one of the reasons why we're sort of casting a wider net, because we now have 130 clients that we can track longitudinally. And it is just begging for an independent evaluation so that we can show the outcomes matter. We've got all this VOCA data, this stuff that we have to, Victims of Crime Act data, that we have to count. You know, is there a lowering, for example, of PTSD symptoms upon the delivery of X number of hours of therapeutic intervention or mentorship or this or that, right? I mean, so we have that data, but mining that data in a systematic way and then going back to the feds and saying, okay, let's mine this and now you fund a national initiative, right? It's hard for us to do that at the moment. We want to do that. And we feel that moving our shop would be more conducive to working with folks. I talked with Michelle Walsh about this a little bit as well. You know, there are a lot of possibilities here. Yes?
Just a real basic question. How many of your staff are bilingual?
We have,
Spanish speaking.
I think, 2 staff who are bilingual.
So consideration here, doing work in the community.
Oh, it's
okay, and this is unrelated. It seems as though, this is not my area at all, so I'm not sure how this question will come out, but it seems that probably one of the most common things of all cases would be how a gun was obtained, how this happened, and that your team would actually be in a really good position to do some gun control advocacy. Yes. So I'd love to hear what your thoughts are on that, and how you all navigate that, and what the ways that you've maybe done that.
That's a great question. We just published a piece in Injury Epidemiology this year on that very issue of firearms and fatalities. And obviously, we're not politically suicidal.
But it's not really a political, I mean it is, but it's simply a true, right? It's part of your investigation.
It is part of our investigation. You're absolutely right. Most law enforcement friends of ours who work, prosecutors, judges, want dangerous individuals who have a history of exhibiting dangerous, perhaps suicidal behavior, who do not have a legal right to own a weapon. We all agree that weapon ought to be removed and retrieved if legally permissible. And yes, you're absolutely right that with the fatality review work, we can track in minute detail whether that gun was taken legitimately or not, how the offender got the gun, if the gun was not taken, why it was not taken. For example, if a police department didn't take the gun when it could have done. Now remember, we don't adopt a blaming and shaming approach because we can't bring folks to the table if we do that. But we can understand why they did or they didn't. So for example, if they tell us, well, we got nowhere to store them, we don't have the personnel to do that, we can't finance that. I mean, those are questions then that we can take back to the community and say, we need to think about this in a different way. So you're absolutely right. And in fact, one of the foci of our clearinghouse meeting, we're bringing folks from 20 states to Flagstaff this summer. And we have a data team. We have an epidemiologist, public health statistician who works at NAU, and Dr. Ferraro heading up the research wing of this, which the feds have allowed us to do, gathering information on firearms and fatalities. And that's going to be part of the data dump. It's one major data domain that we're going to harvest over the next 5 years if we can. But it's a very sensitive issue, as you can imagine. So politically, we test the waters very carefully. I don't know if that's a CYA answer.
It just seems like you're all in a good position to be advocating on that, given. But it sounds like it's also you may not be in the place that you are because if you advocated a certain way.
Well, we're not in the advocacy business. We're in the data.
You're in the prevention.
We're in the prevention business, but we're not in the advocacy business in the sense of saying this data here means that you should, for example, roll back the Second Amendment. Right? We're never going to advocate for that position. Right? My personal feelings on firearms are my personal feelings. Greg's personal feelings are his. What we want to do is to present evidence. In X number of cases, this firearm, everybody agreed, this firearm was in the possession of someone who shouldn't have had it legally, practically, morally, whatever, and it ought to have been removed, and it could have been removed for this mechanism, but it wasn't because of this. That's as far as we would go. You're getting difficult.
No, interesting. It's just a...
It is a great question. So thanks for your question.
You're welcome.
Yeah.
So you mentioned how you only going to Hawaii, and
yes.
I understand the ways that especially Native Hawaiian women are disproportionately impacted by the criminal justice system. And how, when you go over there, does your model just to account for those cultural factors that are really important when considering why, especially Native Hawaiian women, are more likely to go to prison, are more likely to suffer from poverty and experience this violence, especially when we think about Native Hawaiian girls who are also disproportionately impacted by the juvenile justice system. And a lot of the ways that research on Native Hawaiian girls has shown that they've experienced violence in the home. Well, when they have used or implemented their survival skills, right? And that looks like running away from home or teaching school or whatever. They are criminalized for those skills, for trying to survive in context. So how have you thought about the ways that this model works in really like
This model, again, it's a great question. It's a very important question. I've been friends with Mita Chesley-Lynn. I don't know if you know Mita's work.
I saw her last month, so yeah.
Yeah, so I've known Mita for years, and we've written together and published together, and I'm well aware of those issues. And when we bring our model to Hawaii, which we do, and we're out there, I'm talking at a public health conference in mid-May. I'm in Hawaii, and then we're also doing some community-informed risk assessment. Of course, we're cognizant of those issues. And our intent is not to, disproportionately lock people up. That in itself is contrary to due process and the rule of law. We don't want to do that. But so we want to recognize those things, and we want to ask questions about what is the distribution, for example, of intimate partner homicide in the islands. And are you from the islands?
Yeah.
Okay, so if you're aware of the issues in the islands, you'll know that there are a lot of political silences around certain issues. And one of them is the failure to discuss the plight of Native Hawaiians and Samoans. And not just the disproportionate representation of the criminal justice system, but the disproportionate representation amongst the homeless population, which is the highest rate of homelessness in the country. Right? So these are really important issues that we get at, but with the homicide stuff, if you break it down by race and ethnicity, the Filipino rate has, for the last 20 years, been off the charts compared to every other rate. And again, we look at those issues. We are told by some people in authority in Hawaii that they don't like us looking at those issues. It makes them uncomfortable for political reasons. We don't care about that. We're there to look at the data, and any good death review analysis maps aggregate data, and then it drills down on specific case dynamics. So we wouldn't hesitate to look at those issues. But again, we're evidence-based. We're not there to poke the bear. That's not our job. It's to provide evidence for folks who may want to use it if they want to poke the bear. And I'm very happy for the bear to be poked.
There's a lot of great people in Hawaii who are looking
No, I get it. I mean, you know, I get it. Those guys have done some great work. Yeah, absolutely. I agree with you. There was a question over here, I think, a hand that I missed.
Yeah,
Yes.
I had many questions.
Okay, good. Go for it.
So you talked about looking at bias in the risk assessment.
Yes.
I'm wondering about whether you guys have looked at or even have like a sense of bias in who gets flagged as a potentially domestic violence case, and then of that subset that go on to full review, whether there is a disproportionate representation of some populations and the ones that they're willing to look into and identify further levers for change in. And then I was just curious about what your technical assistance process looks like and whether you have actually seen meaningful changes in these teams that spend this time across their silos, whether that materializes as something that can make a difference.
Yeah, terrific questions. We've not tracked who ends up, you know, which, say, racial group, for example, ends up being selected for review. Right? Now, we've not done that because we're shy of doing that. So, for example, if we set up an initiative in the city of Detroit, which has an incredible intimate partner homicide rate, especially homicide-suicide rate, we know that the vast majority of those deaths will be African-American deaths. We know that. Same
That's
in
who Detroit is mostly. Yeah.
I'm sorry?
Detroit is mostly African American.
Right, exactly. So we know the same in St. Louis, so it is. So we've got these, and most of the killings are within the same racial group anyway. So is there political targeting within certain jurisdictions and certain case types? Maybe, but it's not my experience that there is, for the most part. Most teams select cases to review based on what they might learn from that review. So they will engage in thoughtful processes of, do we want to interview a case where there was high systems contact, or low systems contact, or where a woman killed a man for what reason, or whether there was a homicide-suicide, or, you know, that's the kind of case characteristic that they will look to. And you've got to remember, these teams are multi-agency. They have lots of different players at the table. So I don't think, for the most part, you're going to see any conspiratorial stuff around specific, you know, race selection or social class selection. And of course, those homicides themselves are fractured by race and class. But as you well know, the public health data, if you control for SES, or say housing density as a proxy measure for SES, the effect of race almost completely disappears. What you're dealing with race is effectively concentrated poverty. So those are some of the issues. And then the outcome measure question about, okay, so what's the impact of doing fatality review? I would say to you, and this is why I tell communities, if you go to our website, you'll see the kinds of changes that people have implemented. But the broad spectrum of change is an increase in the communication, collaboration, and coordination between those people at the table. When I first started doing death review, systematically, we used to go to the morgue in Miami. And Metro Dade in those days, mid-90s, 95, 94, 5, 6. I can still smell the formalin in my nose from going down the morgue and reviewing these. We spent 5 hours reviewing a case. And in those days, you couldn't put a victim advocate and a cop at the same table. They were like hissing at each other in those days. Nowadays, it happens all the time. And we've come a long way with breaking down the silos. It's not ideal, but it's much better than it was. And I think that is one of the principal outcomes of putting people together, getting them to review a highly charged event, exposing them to family members, and for them to realize, you know, I don't have the keys to the kingdom in my agency. In fact, nobody does. Certainly not the researchers. But when you piece it together, you're going to be able to land the plane on the Hudson and downside better than you are, you know, if you have your colonoscopy and you end up getting offed. Put it in delicately. I'm out of time, but anything else? Comments?
I just wanted to add one thing is,
Okay.
for our fatality review in our community, I mean, it's been an amazing project just to figure out where the gaps are. And a lot of us know where the gaps are because we're such a small community and we get very few resources, especially in this political climate where we're right on the border. We've lost over $2 million in funding in the last year because grants are not open to us because of our geographic distance on the border. But what has been incredibly important about this project and what the Family Violence Institute brought for us is one, that sitting down at the table, even though we all knew each other, we really, until we started working on these fatality reviews, I didn't know the details of what like our pretrial services does, because we don't have a traditional pretrial services. We have a nonprofit that's willing to do pretrial services because the county can't afford a pretrial services. And so in that respect, in the last year, we have actually been able to build alliances and write for grants that have brought other significant amounts of money into the community because now we know how to partner. And I mean, our county attorney's office is a little bit unique in how we approach the community because usually our victim services does a lot of proactive work within the community. Victims don't have to report crimes to work with us or even participate in the criminal justice system. And that's the vision of my boss, who's the county attorney. So I think that's also a really important thing, and I think that'll be a really important thing like in the Hawaii community, because when the people come together, I mean, especially when you've got prosecutors and law enforcement sitting there, and they get to blast you in a situation where, you know, they really get to tell you what they really think, it's, I think, a great community building project. Additionally, we had some issues in our courthouse over, like, the x-ray machine wasn't working. I had no idea because I get to walk through the x-ray machine and nobody says anything because I'm a county attorney. And Neil talked to our county manager and brought up the x-ray machine, and we'd been trying for 9 months, I guess. Well, the court had been trying to get it fixed, and it was fixed within 3 weeks. So that's a powerful part of how these work.
Dan.
So I just wanted to say, because we're out of time, but thank you to Neil and to the entire team from NAU and the various partners for being here. And I know that Neil said that he's willing to hang around for a while if people want to talk with them or have any additional questions. So he's welcome to do that. But in the meantime, I just wanted to thank you.
Thank you for that.